Cassia Blake walked down that aisle and felt every step like a door closing behind her. The flowers were beautiful. The hall was quiet. And not one person who was supposed to love her could meet her eyes. Then she saw him. Baek Do-hyun. Sitting in that wheelchair at the end of the aisle, still a stone, dark suit, dark eyes, watching her the way nobody in that room had ever watched her before. Not with pity. Not with guilt. With something that felt terrifyingly close to recognition. Her steps did not falter. But something inside her did. Before you dive deeper into this story of betrayal, transformation, and unexpected power, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens when love turns to abandonment and a discarded daughter becomes untouchable. Drop a comment below and tell us the country you are watching from. The Park family home sat on the best street in Gangnam. All glass and clean lines. The kind of house that announced its owners before they ever opened their mouths. Inside, every surface gleamed. Every detail had been chosen to impress. And somewhere in the middle of all that perfection, Cassia Blake had learned to make herself small. She was 9 years old when Park Sung-jin and Yoon Hae-won brought her home from the orphanage in Lagos. She remembered the flight, the cold, the smell of a country that did not know her name. She remembered Hae-won kneeling in front of her at the airport. Her eyes soft, her voice gentle. "You are ours now. Forever." She had believed it with everything inside her small, hopeful heart. And for a while it was true. The early years were warm. Sung-jin read to her every night. His pronunciation of English words making her laugh until her stomach hurt. Hae-won braided her hair with patient hands, learning the techniques from videos, practicing until she got it right. They celebrated her birthdays with cakes and laughter, filled albums with photographs, told anyone who asked that Casha was their daughter, fully, completely, without qualification. Then Park Seo-yeon arrived. Casha was 11 when Hae-won discovered she was pregnant. The house transformed overnight. Relatives flooded in with gifts and opinions. The spare room became a nursery painted the softest yellow. Conversations shifted, circled, landed always on the baby coming. Casha sat at the dinner table and watched her parents glow with a particular joy she had not seen before. Something deeper, more primal, more certain. She told herself it was normal. Babies were exciting. She would be a big sister. That was something to be happy about. Seo-yeon was born on a Tuesday, small and loud and instantly adored. Casha stood at the nursery door and watched her parents hold the infant with trembling reverence. And she felt something she could not explain. Not jealousy exactly, but a premonition. Like standing at the edge of a cliff and knowing before anything happened that the ground was about to shift. The ground shifted slowly, imperceptibly at first. A few months later, Casha won the district spelling competition. She came home with a gold medal and a certificate signed by the Regional Education Board. Her parents were in the living room, Seo-yeon propped between them on a blanket, both of them leaning over her, making soft sounds as the baby kicked her legs in the air. "Mom. Dad. I won." Hae-won glanced up. "Oh, that's wonderful, sweetheart." Her eyes returned to Seo-yeon immediately. "Put it on the fridge." Sung-jin didn't look up at all. Casha walked to the kitchen, placed the gold medal on the counter. Not the fridge, just the counter, and stood there for a long moment in the silence of a house that was full of noise. Then she walked to her room, sat on her bed, and stared at the wall. She was too young to name what was happening. But some part of her, the part that had survived an orphanage, the part that had learned to read rooms before she could read books, understood it perfectly. She was becoming background. By the time Casha turned 16, the distance was no longer something she could pretend away. Seo-yeon was 5, bright and beautiful, the center of every room she entered. She had Hae-won's delicate features and Sung-jin's sharp intelligence. And she wore the family's love like a crown, effortlessly, naturally, as if it had always been hers. Casha moved through the same house like a shadow. She cooked when asked. She helped with homework. She smiled at relatives who called her the other one under their breath. She listened to her grandmother tell Hae-won, over jasmine tea in the kitchen, that now the family was complete. The real bloodline continues. She absorbed the words without flinching because she had learned that flinching cost too much. She poured her pain into books, into grades, into a quiet burning ambition that had no audience and no applause. She became excellent in the dark. The night everything changed, Casha was 19. She had just returned from her first year at university, top of her cohort, a scholarship offer from a graduate program sitting in her email, unread because the house had felt different the moment she walked in. Sungjin was in his study. The door was open. He was on the phone, his voice low and strained. Hae-won sat at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold. Seo-yeon was nowhere. The house felt held like a breath before a scream. What happened? Casha set down her bag. Hae-won looked up. Her eyes were red. Sit down. The story came in fragments. The business, the textile empire that had taken Sungjin 20 years to build, was collapsing. Not from competition, not from market shifts, but from something deliberate and coordinated. Shipments gone. Contracts vanished. Suppliers pressured into silence. Someone was dismantling everything from the inside, systematically, patiently, without leaving fingerprints. And then a name had come through their most trusted contact. Baek Do-hyun. Casha had heard the name before, the way you hear thunder before you see lightning, distant, inevitable. Baek Do-hyun was not a businessman. He was something older and colder than that. The kind of man whose name silenced rooms. Who had taken control of 3 criminal networks before his 28th birthday. Who had survived 2 assassination attempts and reportedly did not blink during either. Who was now at 32. Confined to a wheelchair after an ambush 2 years ago that had taken his ability to walk and, according to rumor, only sharpened his hunger for control. He wants a meeting, Sungjin said from the doorway of the kitchen, his face gray with exhaustion. He says he can stop what's happening to the business. At what price? Casha asked. The silence that followed was its own answer. The meeting took place in a private dining room at a restaurant so exclusive it had no sign outside. Casha attended because Sungjin asked her to. She sat beside her mother, her hands folded in her lap, her face composed into the careful neutrality she had spent years perfecting. Baek Do-hyun arrived exactly on time. He moved through the room in his wheelchair with the unhurried authority of a man who had never once questioned whether he belonged somewhere. 2 men flanked him, silent and watchful. He wore a charcoal suit, no tie, no jewelry. Nothing performative. Nothing unnecessary. He was, Casha realized with a start, extraordinarily handsome. Sharp jaw, dark eyes that moved like a camera, cataloging everything. A mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile casually, and only did so when it meant something. He sat across from Sungjin and did not acknowledge Casha or Hae-won immediately. He spoke to her father for several minutes about business, about the attacks, about what he could and could not do. His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that did not need volume to command attention. Then he looked at Casha. Not a glance. Not a polite acknowledgement. A full, unhurried look that started at her face and settled there. Like he had found what he came for. Your daughter, he said. Sungjin hesitated. Yes. Which one attends Seoul National? Another hesitation. Casha. Do-hyun's eyes didn't move from her face. Top of her cohort. It was not a question. Casha felt her spine straighten involuntarily. Yes, she said, before her father could answer for her. The corner of Do-hyun's mouth moved. Almost a smile. Almost. The proposal came 3 days later, delivered through the same intermediary who had arranged the meeting. Sungjin called the family into the living room, all 3 of them, Hae-won, Seo-yeon and Casha, and read it aloud with a voice that shook. Baek Do-hyun would cease all interference with the park business. He would restore the contracts, silence the suppliers, and provide ongoing protection for a period of no less than 5 years. In exchange, he wanted a bride. Seo Yun's reaction was immediate. She stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. Absolutely not. He's in a wheelchair. He's a criminal. I'm not marrying someone like that. Her voice was shrill with the confidence of someone who had never once been told her comfort was secondary. Tell him no. The room went quiet. And then Sungjin said very carefully without looking at Casha. He didn't ask for Seo Yun. Later that night, Casha sat on the floor of her bedroom with her back against the door and her knees drawn to her chest, replaying the moment. The way her father's voice had dropped. The way her mother had not argued. The way Seo Yun had exhaled with relief so loud it had filled the room like a verdict. He didn't ask for Seo Yun. She had known in that moment, with the same cold clarity she had felt watching her mother's eyes slide back to the baby all those years ago, that they would say yes. Not because they didn't love her, but because their love for her had always been the kind that bent when it needed to, the kind that prioritized itself. She was the daughter who understood, the daughter who adapted, the daughter who could be redirected without too much damage, because she had always been strong, always been mature, always been fine. They came to her the next morning, both of them, Sungjin with guilt carved into every line of his face and Haewon with eyes already red from a night of crying that had not changed her answer. We don't have a choice, Sungjin said. Casha looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at her mother. You have a choice. You're making it. Haewon reached for her hand. You'll be cared for. He has resources, protection. I know what he has. Casha pulled her hand back gently. Not angrily. Gently. I want to ask you something. She paused. If Seo Yun were the one he wanted, would you be having this conversation? The silence lasted 4 seconds. She counted. Then she stood up, smoothed her clothes and walked out of the room. The wedding was small and cold. 12 people in a private hall. Flowers chosen by Haewon. Music selected by a coordinator Casha never met. Seo Yun did not attend. Sungjin shook Do-hyun's hand at the reception with the air of a man completing a transaction he could not look at directly. Casha wore white because they asked her to. She walked down the aisle alone. Do-hyun watched her come toward him with an expression she couldn't read. Not triumph, not indifference. Something more patient than either. When she reached him, he extended his hand from the wheelchair, palm up. An offering. She placed her hand in his and felt the warmth of his grip, steady and unhurried. During the vows, his eyes never left her face. When the officiant pronounced them married, Do-hyun leaned forward slightly. His voice was low enough that only she could hear it. I know what they did. And I know what you think this is. A pause. You're wrong. She didn't answer. But something in her chest shifted, small and involuntary. Like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known was there. His compound was on the eastern edge of the city, surrounded by walls and silence and men who moved like shadows. The main house was a study in restraint, dark wood, high ceilings, art that had been chosen by someone who understood beauty without needing to announce it. A woman named Mrs. O met them at the door, composed and efficient, and led Casha to a suite on the 3rd floor that looked out over the city. This is your space, Do-hyun said from the doorway. No one enters without your permission. Including me. Casha turned. We're married. Yes. His eyes held hers. And you had no say in that. So until you do, this room is yours. Your rules. She searched his face for the angle, the manipulation, the thing that would make this make sense as a power move. She found nothing but steadiness. Why did you choose me? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. Because I watched your family for 6 months before I made that offer. I watched Seo Yun perform for rooms. I watched your parents manage appearances. His voice didn't change. And I watched you survive them. Quietly. With more dignity than any of them deserved. He held her gaze. I don't want someone who performs. I want someone who's real. The door closed softly behind him. Casha stood alone in the room, the city glittering below her, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Scene. The first week was careful and strange. They shared meals in a dining room that seated 20, just the two of them at one end of the table. Do-hyun read during breakfast. He asked questions during dinner, not probing ones, just quiet interest. What did she study? What did she think about the news? Whether she preferred the city at night or in the morning. She answered cautiously at first, giving him the minimum. But he never pushed, never performed impatience, never made her feel like her answers were being collected for use against her. By the fourth day, she asked him a question back. How long were you walking before the accident? He looked up from his food. Something moved in his eyes, not pain exactly, but acknowledgement. 30 years. The wheelchair has been too. Do you miss it? A pause. I miss running. A beat. I used to run at 4 in the morning when I couldn't sleep. The city was quiet. It was the only time I felt like just a person. She absorbed this. The image of him, powerful, feared. Alone at 4 in the morning, running through empty streets just to feel ordinary, landed somewhere soft inside her. She didn't say anything else, but she stopped giving him minimum answers after that. Later that week, she found him in the library at midnight. He didn't hear her come in. He was sitting by the window with a book open in his lap, but he wasn't reading. He was staring at the dark garden, his expression unguarded in a way she had never seen. Stripped of the control, stripped of the authority. Just a man sitting alone in the dark. She almost retreated. Instead, she crossed to the other chair by the window and sat down without speaking. He looked over, surprised. I couldn't sleep either, she said simply. They sat in silence for an hour. It was the most comfortable hour she had spent in years. A few days later, the first real threat arrived. Do-hyun was in a meeting when one of his lieutenants, a lean man named Jae-sik, pulled him aside with news that made the air in the room change. A rival faction, the remnants of a network Do-hyun had dismantled the previous year, had identified Casha as a vulnerability. There were photographs of her entering and leaving the compound. Her university records had been accessed. Someone was building a file. Do-hyun's face did not change. Not one muscle. Lock down her schedule, he said quietly. Nothing happens without my knowledge. And find out who touched those records. Jae-sik hesitated. And the girl? Her name, Do-hyun said, his voice dropping to something absolutely still, is Mrs. Beck. Jae-sik didn't hesitate again. Do-hyun told Casha that evening. He didn't soften it, didn't manage the delivery. He sat across from her in the sitting room and told her plainly that she had become a target, what that meant, and what he was doing about it. She listened without interrupting. Are you frightened? He asked when he finished. She considered the question. Yes, but I'm not surprised. She met his eyes. People have always assumed I'm the easiest one to get to. Something flickered across his face. Something sharp and protective. They're wrong. I know, she said quietly. I've always known that. It just took everyone else a while to figure it out. He looked at her for a long moment, with that same focused intensity she had first felt in the restaurant, the look that went past surface and settled somewhere deeper. Then he said, almost to himself, who did this to you? She didn't answer. But they both knew. That same night, Casha stood at her window watching the city when she heard a light knock. She opened the door to find Do-hyun with a small tray tea, and a book she had mentioned wanting to read 3 days ago, in passing, not even as a real request. He had remembered. She took the book, then looked at the title, then looked at him. You listened, she said. I always listen, he said simply, and left. She stood in the doorway holding the book for a long moment, her heart doing something inconvenient and unstoppable in her chest. By the end of the second week, the compound had begun to feel less like a cage and more like a world. She learned its rhythms when Do-hyun's meetings ran long, when the staff took their breaks, which hallway caught the best morning light. She began sitting in on some of his business discussions, initially by accident, then because he started leaving the door open when she passed. She noticed things, patterns in the negotiations, pressure points the other parties didn't know they were revealing. On the third meeting she sat in on, she wrote a single note on the corner of her notepad and slid it across the table to him without drawing attention. He read it without looking at her, then redirected the conversation exactly as she'd suggested. The deal closed in 20 minutes. Afterward, in the hallway, he stopped his chair beside her. "You knew his weakness in the first 10 minutes, Do-hyun said. "He kept touching his watch," Casha said. "Every time the timeline came up. He's under deadline pressure from someone above him. Offering a shorter timeline gave him more than money could." Do-hyun studied her face. "Where did you learn to read people like that?" She gave him a small, quiet smile. "Growing up in a house where I was the only one paying attention." He was silent for a moment. Then, "You're wasted anywhere that doesn't use that mind." It was the most anyone had ever said about her intelligence that felt like it actually meant something. The following evening, Trouble came wearing a suit. His name was Choi-ren, a business associate from Hong Kong who arrived for a dinner meeting and spent the first 20 minutes paying close attention to Casha in a way that had nothing to do with business. He spoke to her in English, leaned in when she answered, laughed too easily at things she said, let his eyes linger on her face and then lower with the casual entitlement of a man accustomed to getting away with it. Casha handled it with cool, practiced grace, giving nothing and revealing nothing. The way she had learned to navigate spaces where she was underestimated. Do-hyun said nothing, but she noticed his hands on the arms of his wheelchair. Knuckles white, jaw set, eyes that tracked Choi-ren with the flat, patient attention of a predator deciding whether to move. After dinner, as the men moved to the study, Choi-ren paused beside Casha and said, low enough that it was meant only for her. He keeps you well, but a woman like you deserves more than a man who can't. Choi. Do-hyun's voice came from across the room. Quiet. Absolute. Choi-ren stopped speaking mid-sentence. The room stopped breathing. We're done for tonight, Do-hyun said. Still quiet. Still even. The most dangerous tone Casha had ever heard. My driver will take you back to your hotel. Choi-ren left without another word. The room slowly exhaled. Later, when everyone else was gone, Do-hyun found Casha in the garden. He said nothing at first. Just sat beside her in the cool night air. The city humming below them. You didn't have to do that, she said finally. Yes, he said. I did. She turned to look at him. His profile was sharp against the city light, jaw tight, something still burning quietly behind his eyes. Were you angry? She asked. Furious, he said simply. Then he looked at her. Not at you. She held his gaze. The air between them was warm and charged and full of something neither of them had named yet. Do-hyun, she said softly. Casha, he said back. And the way he said her name, deliberate, like something he had been holding carefully, made her breath catch. She looked away first. But she was smiling when she did. That night, she lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, trying to organize her feelings into something manageable. She had come into this marriage as a transaction. She had told herself she would survive it the way she had survived everything, quietly, with dignity, without needing anything from anyone. But something was happening that survival had not prepared her for. Baek Do-hyun saw her. Not the version of her she performed for rooms. Not the capable, adaptable, convenient Casha that her family had shaped. The real one, sharp and wounded and brilliant and guarded. And he looked at that version of her like it was exactly what he had been looking for. And that, she thought, staring at the dark ceiling of the most beautiful room she had ever slept in, was the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to her. 3 weeks into the marriage, a message arrived from Hae-won. Brief, careful, testing the temperature. We hope you're well. The business has improved. We're grateful. Casha read it twice, then set her phone face down on the desk and went back to the contract she had been reviewing for Do-hyun's legal team. She was not ready, and she would not pretend to be. Do-hyun found her an hour later, still at the desk, still working. He said nothing about the phone, but he brought her coffee, set it at her elbow, and rested one hand briefly on her shoulder as he passed. Just that. Just a hand on her shoulder for 3 seconds. She stared at the document and felt tears she did not allow herself to cry prick the back of her eyes. This was what her parents had traded away. Not an inconvenient daughter. A person who was capable of this, of sitting at this desk in this world, becoming someone extraordinary. And the man they had given her to, the feared and dangerous and supposedly monstrous Baek Do-hyun, had seen it before they ever thought to look. She picked up the coffee. She kept working. But something had cracked open in her, wide and irreversible. She was starting terrifyingly to feel at home. If this story has you feeling something, subscribe, hit that like button, drop a comment telling us what you think of Do-hyun, because what is coming next, the danger gets real, the feelings get impossible, and Cassia Blake is about to discover exactly how far Baek Do-hyun will go to keep her safe and to keep her. The threat stopped being abstract on a Thursday morning. Casha had taken to walking the compound gardens before breakfast, a habit she had developed without realizing it, drawn by the quiet and the cold air and the way the city looked from the eastern wall, still and silver before it woke. She was alone, as she always was at that hour, or thought she was. The man appeared from the service entrance. Young, unfamiliar, moving too fast for someone who belonged there. Their eyes met. He froze. She froze. Then he turned and ran, and within seconds, 2 of Do-hyun's men appeared from nowhere, taking him down before he reached the outer wall. Casha stood very still in the garden, her pulse hammering, the dew-wet grass cold through her shoes. Do-hyun was beside her in 4 minutes. She knew because she counted. He said nothing at first. He looked at her face, cataloging, assessing. Then he looked at the place where the man had been taken down, and something passed across his expression that she had never seen before. Something raw and volcanic that he extinguished in seconds, pressing it back behind the controlled surface. Did he touch you? His voice was careful. Too careful. No. Did he speak to you? No. He exhaled slowly. Then he looked at her again. I'm moving your morning walk inside until this is resolved. She opened her mouth to argue. He met her eyes and the argument dissolved. Not because he was commanding, because he looked frightened. Genuinely, quietly frightened in a way that powerful men almost never allowed themselves to look. She closed her mouth. She nodded. He reached out and tucked a loose braid behind her ear, his fingers barely grazing her temple, there and gone, barely a breath of contact, and then turned back toward the house. Casha pressed her hand to the side of her face where his fingers had been and stood there in the garden for a long moment, her heart somewhere in her throat. Later that morning, Do-hyun convened his inner circle. Casha was not invited. She sat in the library 2 floors up and listened to the muffled rhythm of voices below. Urgent, controlled, periodically sharp, and understood that the world outside the compound walls was rearranging itself in dangerous ways. Mrs. O brought her tea and said nothing reassuring, which Casha appreciated. False comfort had always felt worse than honesty. By afternoon, Do-hyun came to find her. He sat across from her in the library armchair and laid it out plainly, the way he always did. The faction that had been building a file on her had made their move. The man in the garden was a scout. There would be more. They want leverage, he said. They believe taking you destabilizes me. Casha absorbed this. Does it? He looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said simply. No performance. No deflection. Just the truth, given to her like something she had earned. She felt the weight of it settle over her. Not as fear but as something more complicated. She mattered to him. Not as a symbol or a transaction or a convenience. As a person. As her. "What do we do?" she asked. "We don't give them the opportunity." He paused. "And I need you to trust me." She looked at his face, steady, serious. The eyes of a man who had never once promised something he didn't intend to keep. "Okay," she said quietly. "I trust you." Something shifted in his expression. Barely perceptible but enormous. Like a door opening in a room that had been sealed for years. The following days passed in a state of compressed tension. Security doubled. Casha's movements were limited but not confined. Do-hyun was careful about the distinction, careful always to ask rather than dictate, to explain rather than command. She understood more each day about the architecture of the world he had built, the loyalty he commanded, the fear he wielded strategically, the strange, strict code of honor that governed a man who operated outside every legitimate law. She also understood with increasing clarity that he was lonely. Not in a way he acknowledged or perhaps even recognized. But it lived in the small things, the way he lingered over dinner conversations longer than he needed to, the way he found reasons to pass through whatever room she was in, the way his whole demeanor shifted when she laughed, something warming in him like a light coming on. One evening she asked him about his family. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. "My mother died when I was 7, he said finally. "My father was not a good man. I was raised by his organization." A pause. "I learned everything I know about power from people who used it badly. I decided early I would use it differently." "Do you think you have?" she asked. He considered honestly. "Sometimes. Not always." His eyes found hers. "You make me want the answer to be yes more than I did before." The room felt very small suddenly. Very warm. Casha looked down at her hands. "Do-hyun." "I know," he said quietly. "I'm not asking for anything, Casha. I just wanted you to know." She looked up. He was watching her with that patient, devoted steadiness that had undone her defenses piece by piece over the past weeks. She thought about everything she had survived to sit in this room. Everything that had been taken and given and traded and lost. And she thought about how strange it was that the most honest place she had ever existed was inside a life she had never chosen. She reached across the space between them and took his hand. He went very still. She held it, his hand in both of hers, and didn't say anything, because there was nothing that needed saying. He turned his hand over slowly and laced his fingers through hers, and they sat like that in the quiet library while the city hummed outside and the danger gathered at the walls and something between them became irrevocable. The attack came on a night when the rain was heavy enough to muffle sound. Casha woke to the compound alarm at 2 in the morning, disoriented and reaching for the bedside lamp. The door opened before she found it. Do-hyun, already dressed, his face stripped of everything except focus and urgency. "We need to move you. Now." She was out of bed and moving before the sentence finished, years of quiet self-sufficiency making her fast and unfrightened by logistics. She grabbed what mattered: phone, documents, the small photograph she kept in her nightstand, a habit from the orphanage, always knowing what she would take if she had to leave quickly. Do-hyun noticed the photograph. Said nothing. But his jaw tightened. They moved through the compound's interior corridors, Mrs. O ahead, 2 men behind. Sounds of commotion from the outer perimeter, controlled, organized, Do-hyun's people responding. Someone had breached the eastern wall. 3 men, heavily armed, looking for something specific. Looking for her. They reached the safe room on the lower level, reinforced, windowless, with independent communication systems and enough supplies for 72 hours. Do-hyun's men secured the door from outside. Inside it was just the 2 of them. Cassia sat on the low bench along the wall. Her breathing was controlled. Her hands were steady. But in the stark overhead light, She looked at Do-hyun and saw the thing he was working hardest to contain. A fury so deep it had gone cold, and beneath it, like bedrock beneath ice, terror. "You're scared," she said softly. "I am." No hesitation. "For me." He looked at her directly. "I would burn this entire city to ash before I let them touch you. Yes. For you." The words landed differently than she expected. Not like possession. Like grief. Like someone who had found something irreplaceable and was staring at the possibility of losing it. She crossed the room and stood in front of him. He looked up at her from the wheelchair. His eyes dark and open in a way she had only glimpsed before, never seen fully. She put her hand against his face. He closed his eyes. "I'm here," she said. "I'm right here." His hand came up and covered hers, pressing it harder against his cheek, and she felt the slight tremor in him, the tightly leashed emotion of a man who had survived everything by feeling nothing, unraveling quietly in the safest place he had ever been, beside her. "Casha," he said, her name barely a sound. "I know," she whispered. What happened next was slow and inevitable, like a tide that has been building for weeks finally meeting the shore. He reached for her. She leaned in, and in the quiet of the safe room, with the world rearranging itself violently outside, they found each other in the space between fear and relief, between survival and something worth surviving for. The light stayed on. The door stayed closed. And what passed between them was made entirely of honesty, two people who had been alone in different ways, choosing finally not to be. By morning the compound was secure. For men were in custody. The rival faction's operation had been neutralized in a single night. The consequence of underestimating how completely Do-hyun had prepared for exactly this scenario. Casha sat in the kitchen while Mrs. O made breakfast and the compound settled back into its rhythms. She held her coffee with both hands and stared at the garden through the window, watching the rain clear, watching the light come through. She was waiting for regret. She had expected it, the morning after fear that intimacy becomes weakness, that vulnerability becomes ammunition. It didn't come. What came instead was the memory of his face in that safe room. Open and trembling and entirely devastatingly real. She heard his chair in the hallway. She knew the sound of it now, the particular rhythm. He came into the kitchen and stopped when he saw her, reading her face with the careful attention he gave everything. She looked back at him steadily. Something in his shoulders dropped, barely perceptible, but she caught it. Relief. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said back. Mrs. O put a second cup on the table without being asked and quietly disappeared. 3 days later Casha left. Not because of Do-hyun. Because of herself. She had woken at 4 in the morning with the cold certainty of someone who has just understood something they should have seen earlier. She had fallen in love, she could name it now, clearly and without flinching, with a man who had entered her life through the worst betrayal she had ever survived. A man chosen by her parents as a transaction. A man the world feared. And she did not trust that it was real. Not her love that she was certain of, but his. She did not trust that she wasn't simply the most convenient woman in his vicinity, that what he felt wasn't gratitude or obsession, or the particular tenderness that powerful men sometimes develop for the things they own. She had been someone's convenient choice before. She could not survive being that again. She wrote him a note. 3 sentences. "I need to know this is real and not just safe. I need to find that out somewhere that isn't already yours. I'll come back if the answer is yes." She left before dawn, taking nothing that wasn't hers, leaving everything he had given her. She went to the only place that felt neutral, the small apartment of her university friend Gina, who asked no questions and made ramen at 5 in the morning without blinking. He found her in 6 hours. Not by tracking her phone, she had left it. Not through his network, though she knew he could have. He found her because Gina, who had heard enough about Casha's situation over 3 years of friendship to have opinions, opened the door and said, She needs to hear what you actually feel. Not what you can provide. What you feel. Do-hyun looked at Jina for a moment. Then, can I come in? Jina stepped aside. Casha was in the kitchen, her back to the door, when she heard the familiar sound of his chair on the laminate floor. She gripped the counter. She didn't turn around. You read my note, she said. 3 times. Then you know why I left. Yes. A pause. The sound of him moving closer. You left because you're the most intelligent person I've ever met, and you refuse to let hope make you stupid. Another pause. I respect that more than I can say. She turned then because she couldn't not. He was closer than she expected, his eyes holding hers with that steady, unflinching attention. No performance. No management. Just him. I need to tell you something, he said. And I need you to let me finish before you answer. She nodded. I chose you before I made that offer to your father. His voice was even, but the words were not easy. She could hear the effort of a man unaccustomed to this kind of exposure. I had watched your family for months. I had seen you in that house, invisible and excellent, and I felt something I hadn't felt since I was 7 years old and still believed people could be worth trusting. He paused. I engineered a reason to get close to you because I didn't know another way. That was wrong. I know it was wrong. I'm not asking forgiveness for it. Casha was very still. But what happened between us, what I feel, that is not convenience. It is not gratitude. It is not ownership. His jaw tightened. You are the first person in my adult life I have wanted to be better for. Not stronger. Better. And if you walk away from me today, I will respect it. But I will spend the rest of my life knowing that I found the one person who made me real. And I lost her because I came to her the wrong way. The kitchen was silent. Jina had apparently found somewhere else to be. Casha looked at him for a long time. This man who had entered her life as a transaction and become the truest thing in it. She thought about the library at midnight. The hand on her shoulder. The coffee. The book. The way he said her name like it was something precious. She crossed the small kitchen and stood before him. You came to me the wrong way, she said. Yes. But you've been honest with me every day since. Yes. She cupped his face in her hands. He went very still, the way he always did when she touched him, like someone receiving something they had not dared want. Then we start from here, she said. Not from the beginning. From here. His hands came to her waist, and he pressed his forehead against her sternum, and she felt the long exhale move through him, years of armor releasing in a single breath. From here, he said. Yes. 6 months later, the Park family business was fully absorbed into Do-hyun's holdings, a consequence of contracts Sung-jin had signed without understanding, the slow transfer of a lifetime's work into other hands. Sung-jin finally grasped the truth when the board meeting he tried to chair was run instead by Do-hyun's legal team. He and Hae-won came to the compound. Casha met them in the formal receiving room, Do-hyun beside her, not in front of her, not behind her. Beside. Sung-jin looked older, hollowed by guilt. Hae-won's eyes went immediately to Casha's face, searching for damage, for accusation, for the wound she had always known was there. We made a terrible mistake, Sung-jin said. We know that. Casha looked at them both, these people who had given her a home and then traded her out of it. She waited for the anger. It was there, but quieter now, settled into something she could hold without it burning her. Yes, she said simply. You did. Hae-won stepped forward. We love you. We always did. I know, Casha said. And I believe you. A pause. But love that bends when it's inconvenient is not the kind I need anymore. She did not offer forgiveness. She did not close the door. She simply stood in her own life, in the room of the home she had made, and she let them see who she had become, not despite them, but entirely beyond them. Do-hyun said nothing throughout. He did not need to. His presence beside her was its own statement. They left. Casha stood at the window and watched the car go. "Are you all right?" Do-hyun asked. "Yes," she said. And meant it. On a clear evening in late autumn, Do-hyun took her to the rooftop garden he had built above the compound's main house. She had not known it existed, which told her he had made it recently, made it for this. String lights. Her favorite flowers, which she had mentioned once in passing 4 months ago. A table for 2. She looked at all of it and then looked at him. "You remember," she said. "I always remember," he said. "Everything." They ate dinner as the city lit up below them, the conversation easy and warm, the comfort of 2 people who had stopped performing for each other. When the plates were cleared and the night had deepened, Do-hyun reached into his jacket and set a small box on the table. Casha looked at it, then at him. "I didn't do this right the first time," he said. "I want to do it right now." He opened the box. Simple, perfect, chosen with the same quiet attention he gave everything. "Cassia Blake, you are the most extraordinary person I have ever known. You survived things that would have broken most people, and you did it with a grace that humbles me." His voice was steady but his eyes were not. "I am asking you with nothing owed, nothing transacted, nothing required to choose me. Choose this life. Choose us." She looked at the ring for a long moment. Then she looked at him, this man, broken and powerful and lonely and devoted, who had seen her when no one was looking and decided she was worth everything. "Yes," she said. "I choose you." He slid the ring onto her finger, and she pulled him forward by the lapels of his jacket, and they were kissing in the string lights above the city that was entirely theirs. 8 months later, on a morning when the sun came through the bedroom curtains in long gold bars, Casha stood in the bathroom holding a test and staring at 2 lines. She was still standing there when Do-hyun knocked softly and opened the door. He read her face before he read anything else he always did. His eyes dropped to her hand, back to her face. Something happened to his expression that she had never seen before. Something so unguarded and enormous it made her eyes fill immediately. He reached for her hand, both of them, the test and the hand holding it, and held on. "Casha," he said. Just her name. But the way he said it contained everything: the 4 in the morning runs through empty cities, the loneliness, the walls, the long careful journey from survival to this. To her. To here. She pressed her forehead to his. "We're going to be somebody's family," she whispered. "We already are," he said. Outside, the city moved and breathed and went about its business, entirely unaware that in a compound on the eastern edge, a girl who had been traded away had become untouchable. Not because of the man beside her. Because of who she had always been, seen finally by someone who knew how to look. And that was more than enough. That was everything. If this story moved you, if Casha and Do-hyun made your heart feel something, smash that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Tell us what was the moment you fell for Do-hyun. We read every single one. Thank you for watching and we will see you in the next story.